This is an RNZ podcast.
Kia ora and welcome. A warning as we get started. You may find this podcast confronting. It contains graphic descriptions. If you haven't heard the story of Wren Arcus, please go back and listen to episode 1, The Thunderstorm. You'll hear about a subject most of us find hard even to contemplate, let alone speak of.
Her full name is Wren Sarah Thunderstorm Arcus.
I feel the loss of them all. When he was gone, my arms ached. Yeah.
Everything about Māori culture is about connecting to people who've passed away, and everything they do actually. Tangi, pōwhiri, waiata, mōtiatia, karakia, whaikorero, all of that.
She was tiny, she was beautiful, but still and silent.
People look at us and we joke and we laugh and we can be crass, but it's because we cry every day.
If something happened to this baby, I do not know how I would cope or how we would cope.
I'm Susie Ferguson, and this is The Unthinkable.
If I didn't meet the right person, I was not going to have children. And that was always my thing. And then I met Sam, and he totally was, and he is a wonderful father, and I knew he would be an amazing father, and I really wanted kids with him. I really wanted a family with him.
That's Wren's mum, my friend Kate Gudsell. Wren lived for just 6 days after she was born. Following months of an uneventful, healthy pregnancy, Kate and her husband Sam Arcus left the hospital without their firstborn. Now they're expecting again.
I'll be about 18 and a half weeks, I'll be 19 weeks shortly. And the due date is the 17th of September, which is basically a year since, it'll be a year since we've had Wren, and she died, basically. She was due on the 3rd of September, she was born on the 8th, and she died on the 14th.
This time it's another girl, and they've called her Frida.
I also think that people think that now that we're pregnant again, and we got pregnant, 2 months afterwards, it's like, oh, you'll be fine, you'll be right. This isn't a replacement. We're talking about human beings, we're talking about lives, You don't just replace a child. People say, oh, don't worry, lightning doesn't strike twice and all that kind of stuff.
But
that's bullshit. It does.
Yeah,
There are plenty of people who lost 2 children.
Shit.
And, there's plenty of people who've lost 2 kids.
You'll have heard in the last episode how Sam dealt with the weeks following Wren's death. He'd taken redundancy from his job, and instead of having a baby daughter to care for in the months before he started his apprenticeship to be an electrician, Sam's days were dark and empty.
We kind of can be a little bit macabre with our jokes or whatever, but this is one of our ways of dealing with what happened is...
I think people look at us and we joke and we laugh and we can be crass, but it's because we cry every day.
And in the aftermath of Wren's death, Kate had to go back to work.
Wren died on the 14th of September, and I think I went back at the end of October. So 6 weeks, it's not long. And now look back and think, my God, 6 weeks. But it felt like quite long, and I really just needed to do something. Like I just, I was sort of kind of sitting around home. I needed to just get back into the swing of things. And I just really wanted to kind of get back into a pattern of living again a little bit because, just to kind of get back into the cycle of stuff. And because, we wanted to start trying for kids again and all that sort of thing. So I felt like the sooner I got back to kind of as close as normal as we could get, not that we'll ever be normal again, but it was the better. And it was a really, I remember Sam drove me in, and even now I feel like anxious thinking about it. It was horrible. I remember just feeling so, it wasn't like I was nervous about coming back. I just didn't want to talk to people. I didn't want to see people. I didn't want to have, all those questions. I didn't know how I was going to deal with people. I didn't know how people were going to treat me. And I remember just walking into the newsroom and not being able to physically move past, because you basically walk down a corridor and then you kind of get into the newsroom, and I couldn't go further, and I just turned around and ran into the bathroom and started crying.
She dried her tears and stepped into the newsroom. People said hi. She said hi back. Kate turned on the computer and was confronted with stacks of emails, condolences for the loss of her daughter.
Some people were amazing. I remember this one bulletin editor who was just the sweetest guy ever, and he just sort of came up and he just said, "I'm really pleased you're back, but I'm really sorry for the reason you're back." And it was just like exactly the kind of thing I just needed to hear, something like that, and it was just nice. But I think possibly my own personality feeds into it a little bit, because I'm not, I'm probably, I'm not fierce or whatever, but I'm pretty hard, and I think probably it's not like I'm not like a vulnerable person, it's sort of thing, if that makes sense. So I think people probably were maybe a little bit, scared to say something to me, possibly.
I'm scared to say something
yeah,
to you.
exactly. So my own husband is, it's quite potential my colleagues are. So I think that possibly feeds into a little bit. Someone sent me an email saying, "I'm really sorry, but I know you're really resilient." So that's, I think people, that might have been the attitude as well.
But not everyone struck the right note.
Do people say kind of weird stuff to you that you kind of feel like turning around and, I don't know, giving it to them with both barrels, but you kind of can't?
Yes.
Yeah, and the good thing is Kate does give it to them with both barrels most of the time.
Someone said to me, "It's kind of like a family bereavement that you went through, isn't it?" And I was like, "Well, actually, yeah, my daughter did die, so it is a family bereavement." And they were like, "Yeah, kind of like a family bereavement." I was like, no, it is a family bereavement. And then I just couldn't physically control myself, so I just walked away.
Kate was RNZ's environment reporter, and a couple of days later she went to her first media conference as part of getting back into her job as a journalist.
What am I doing here? What am I doing here? Why am I here? And going in and just sitting and talking to people that I'd sort of seen 6 months ago, and I think they just assumed that, my life was completely normal, but actually, the night before, less than 12 hours ago, I'd had my daughter's postmortem results. Yeah. So it was pretty hard, and it was hard as well because, with doing the environment round, there's a lot of people I talk to, just contacts, that sort of thing. And I had to ring all these people up, and they're like, "Oh, how are you? How's your baby?" And I'm like, "She died." And they're like, "Oh my God." And I'm like, "I know. Let's do the interview," kind of. It was just, and people were lovely. People were really lovely, and I think they genuinely felt, awful for me, and understood where, that maybe I wasn't sort of 100% and stuff. But it was really hard, and it took a long time for me to kind of get that passion and that, and just not feel completely numb about everything. I mean, I felt numb about everything. It wasn't just work. I just kind of had to get on with it, though, because I just felt like it was either that or sit at home and drink, really, And,
Kate became pregnant with their second child 2 months after Wren's death. And Frida's due date is almost a year to the day.
If something happened to this baby, I do not know how I would cope or how we would cope.
It's about putting on your big girl pants and getting on with life. And life has puddles in its path, and you just climb out of them. Kia ora, I'm Debbie Watkin. I'm a psychologist at Te Pururuho, which is a ADHD child protection team.
The unthinkable happened to Debbie Watkin and her husband Paul Fairless too.
I was scared. It was the process really began quite swiftly. Paul pulled up a big lazy boy chair, and we pretended we knew what we were doing. Paul took some work, and he was sitting doing some work, and I took a book that I flicked through the pages off, but was doing nothing there. And we didn't know anything. We saw no social worker. We saw certainly no kindness, I recall.
Debbie's a psychologist who's spent much of her career working in the field of family and child trauma in Auckland.
Everything shapes your life, every experience, good and bad. You bundle it together and you add it into your memory bank, your storage, and it becomes some of the hard stuff, but also some of the precious stuff.
In 1991, 7 months into her first pregnancy when she was 32 years old, her first child, Terrell, was stillborn.
She was tiny, she was beautiful, but still and silent.
Debbie had gone on her own for a regular GP visit, and there was no heartbeat, so she was sent to hospital for monitoring.
I remember sitting, in the appointment, and then having a new scan, and a doctor coming in and being very harsh and saying, "I'm not sure what you know, but your baby is dead." And it really, I remember just again not crying, not being distressed. I said, okay, and just. I was really trying to be brave. I was trying to be grown up. And my baby was dead.
The day Debbie found out, she'd been nesting and pottering, painting the kitchen ceiling, and had been doing some planting in the garden. It was only in hindsight she made sense of that time.
Then I remember sitting and starting to put together the pieces, and remember thinking I hadn't felt entirely right. I'd felt funny kind of tummy feelings. The kicks had changed to be more like cramps, which I guess was really the beginning of that sort of ultimate early labour. But it was, you suppress all of that, you push it down deep. And I was focusing on a round belly and a warm belly and positive thoughts. So when I sat and started putting together the pieces, it became more clear. But I suddenly felt like I was a walking coffin. I felt distressed and anxious, and at the time was trying to compartmentalise things and really wanted to tick this off. And I didn't know where I was going, but I wanted to deal with it. I don't know if it was the right thing, and I think I look back and I think I wish I'd gone slower.
No one in the family saw their baby except Debbie and Paul.
It was awful, and I'm a little uncomfortable talking about it, but I remember after she was born, the doctor who'd come in to sort of help Paul, he delivered her and then placed her on a metal, like a large kidney dish. And I remember saying, "Get her off that. I want her." And they said, "You want to see her?" And I said, "Yes, I want to see this baby." So they sort of took her out of this cold metal dish and put her on this sheet, which I just lifted between my legs, and we sat really there for about 3 hours. So we had her for a few hours, and really just touched her and looked at her. So had her for a little bit of time.
At birth, Terrell was identified as a boy, and after weeks of grieving for him, later they were told their baby had, in fact, been a girl, and they were left reeling at the loss of a different child. There was no birth certificate or death certificate.
And they ended up taking 3 Polaroid photos, which were awful. She lay on a blood-stained green sheet with no attention to wrapping her or caring for her, and so that's still distressing but special for me to have, and I'm grateful for that, which I almost bears witness to that actually she existed, because you can kind of almost deny that there was ever a life.
You've heard in episode 2 that while grief counselling was one thing that helped Sam and Kate, they struggled with the Western attitude to grief. Debbie says time itself doesn't heal. It's the people and what you do in acknowledging trauma.
I think that in today's society, Western civilization, where we're all about trying to make things better and be done with grief, or any event, whether it's a trauma, and we do this therapy or counselling. I think what does make a difference is the being. I think we flip the whole idea about don't just sit there, do something. I think we have to flip it and do the don't just do something, sit there. And I think the people who really made the difference were the people who just sat with me, who didn't even often use words, who just showed kindness. And now this is my work that you asked about, how this has impacted on me now, and this is the trauma-informed practice that we adopt here. at Te Pourereho, which is really about recognise the impact of trauma on people, but also the value of kindness in resilience, because that's what makes the difference to somebody, not in my opinion, flipping them off to counselling to see somebody 1 hour a week. For some people, that may make a difference, but for me it was every day. It wasn't an emotion I needed to pull out once a week at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday. It was in the middle of the night. It was, unpacking the dishwasher.
Debbie mentions there how it's now her vocation. Terrell changed her life. Debbie repeatedly wrote and complained to National Women's Hospital, where she'd given birth. After Terrell's birth and death, and as a result of her criticism of the hospital, National Women's asked for her professional help. So Debbie wrote Empty Arms, a booklet for parents whose babies die around the time of birth, and she did training with medical professionals across much of the 1990s.
The response to distress in all of its forms, I think, is what we understand about the brain and neuroscience and this part of the brain, this limbic system where all of those emotions and memories get stored. It has to start with being stable and empathetic and kind to begin with before we can do any thinking and reasoning. And as this lovely elderly Māori woman came up to me recently when I was presenting, and she said, Debbie, isn't it amazing that neuroscience has finally caught up to what Māori have always known, that is e tangata, e tangata, e tangata.
He aha te mea nui o te ao. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. Debbie's referring to a Māori proverb, meaning, what is the most important thing in the world? It is people, it is people, it is people. And it's talking about not just the people alive here and now, but people that are connected by tupuna, ancestors, through to descendants yet to be born. It's the Māori worldview.
People all congregate, they support each other, and everything about Māori culture is about connecting to people who've passed away, in everything they do, actually. Tangi, pōwhiri, waiata, wōtiatia, karakia, whaikorero, all of that. It's all about connecting to people who have passed away. Ko Pania Mitchell tōku ingoa, so my name is Pania Mitchell, and no Taranaki aho, so I'm from Taranaki.
Pania is a social worker in Porirua, just north of Wellington. Her second child, Manaya, was born on the 30th of December 2007.
When I gave birth to him, one of the nurses noticed a clicky noise in his chest, and then she went and took him to NICU, or neonatal unit, and it all kind of went crazy from there, and the doctor told me that my son had transposition of great arteries, which meant his heart wasn't pumping correctly. And at that time, Riley told me that he was going to die. He could die. I can't remember. It was a bit of a blur. At that time, my husband had gone off, and then they rang him to tell him to come back. It was a bit crazy. And what happened is someone from Auckland flew down to Wellington and did an operation on Manaya, and then me and my husband and Manaya flew back to Auckland to see if he would survive that operation. And sadly, he didn't survive that operation, and he passed away on the 1st of January 2008.
9 years after Manaya's death, education researcher Nicola Bright had bad news about her second pregnancy, coming just after New Year. She told me about it through her tears.
Well, I'm here to talk about my boy, Te Oriwa. So he was stillborn at 22 weeks on the 13th of January 2017. I found out that he died on the 10th of January, so I'd gone through Christmas and New Year's, and I'd come back to Wellington to have my regular midwife appointment. And they couldn't find a heartbeat, so they sent me to the hospital to get the proper scanners, and put me through a couple of different scanners, and they found out my boy had died. Yeah.
And I'm really sorry. And that's quite, God, it's not long ago at all. When you hear that news, what happens? What do you do? What do you think?
It's like a black hole opens up on your life. Because you have a life planned with this child, and then it's all gone.
So you're at the hospital, and
so I was there alone, because I thought this was just a regular appointment. So I was just doing my thing, and when I found out the news, so I rang whānau and friends from the hospital, and I was a mess, of course. And they came and looked after me, and yeah, I just fell apart. Yeah.
How did you have your baby?
I gave birth to my son, which was a surprise, actually, because I had had surgeries in order to help me have a baby, and I'd been through IVF and lots of procedures to get to this point. And I had expected to have a C-section, because it would have, if he'd gone full term, there was concern that I might have died having him the usual way. So I was quite surprised when they said, "You're going to have this baby the old-fashioned way." And I wasn't prepared. I hadn't done any of those classes where you go and learn how to breathe through it and do all those things, because I was just not expecting this to happen. So yeah, he was born, and I had a room at the hospital to myself, and my whānau came, my sister and my auntie and my father and friends all turned up. And strangely, it was the kind of birth experience, apart from my son having died, apart from that, it was the kind of birth experience I would have wanted. I was surrounded by people who loved me. There was singing. I was walking up and down the room in labour, and my friends were singing so that I could sing to relax me. So I have some beautiful memories. Strange. It sounds strange to say this, but I do. Yeah, there were many beautiful things about his birth.
What was it like to hold him? What did he look like? Can you tell me about him?
Well, he was born at 22 weeks, so I was actually a bit frightened, because I didn't know what that would mean. But I remember different parts of him were so perfect. He had the most perfect lips, and he had these big feet, beautiful big feet.
And Nicola, like Pania before her, took her boy home ahead of his tangihanga, or funeral.
On the day, I think, or the day after I found out he died, I got the medication and took it, and they sent me home to wait. And so 3 days later, I went back into the hospital. So in that time, we got my house ready. We set it up in the way you do for a tangi. We had the areas sectioned off where me and baby would be, and where people could visit us, and away from other sections of the house. As you do, you set your tikanga and you go with it. So we were ready. I had everything laid out, ready for him. All the mattresses and his clothes.
And you got to, I guess you got to spend time with him in the hospital, but you got to spend time with him at home too.
I did. So he was born at about 5:20 p.m. on a Friday night, and we spent the night in the hospital together, and my poor sister had to sleep on chairs pressed together, and then the next day, that afternoon, we took him home, and I got to be at home with him, and I'm still crying, oh my God. Sorry.
That's all right.
I haven't told this bit of the story for a while.
Okay. And he had a tangi?
Yes. So what happened initially is that we took my son back to my mum's house. So initially in my culture, we all kind of congregate back at home, which is at that time for me, that was kind of my home. And then we stayed the night there where I could share Manaia with my family. So they got the opportunity to meet him and be around him, and we, did processes like karakia, and I had a kaumātua come to my house.
Yeah, when you can't think straight and you have trouble making any kind of decision, it's very comforting to fall back on those rituals and to have people around you who know the same things, and everything can click into place to help you. Yeah, so when we were at my home, we'd looked after others in people's homes before. So once we were there, we knew what we were doing.
Social worker came and saw us. All my husband's family who lived in Auckland came and saw us. All my family who found out about it all came to Auckland. And we went to a funeral director. Actually, it's the funeral director of the TV program, the Casketeers. I know, random.
So this was a Māori funeral director?
Yeah. It was a Māori funeral director. So we went to the funeral place, and they changed him and we put him in a coffin. And then we all jumped in our cars and drove to Wellington.
And you took Manaia with you?
Well, my husband was in the car with Manaia in the van, and I went with my sister, not far away. Like it was a bit of a convoy home.
Yeah, we packed up, had our convoy going 7.5 hours to take my boy home, and whānau joined us along the way, and so we took him home to the marae, and he got to stay in our wharenui while we sang to him and said goodbye.
That sounds really beautiful.
It was beautiful. It was a sunny evening, and his cousins came, and it was lovely. Yeah, it was really nice. Awful, but nice.
Do you remember how you spoke about it in those first few days? How you told the story?
Oh, yeah, hard. I cried a lot, over and over again. I'm pretty sure I was wearing sunglasses a lot. I liked that I could tell them the truth, and I really enjoyed just telling them what we did. We went on a plane ride from Wellington to Auckland, and Sasef had lived. I talked about transposition of great arteries, about his heart, and I tell my children like his heart was broken, that we needed to fix it couldn't be fixed, just talking like a way to help people process what just happened. So I really enjoyed getting up and just talking about, even though it was really hard, I really enjoyed just telling people the truth. And so they all went away knowing what I felt, how I feel, and because it was pretty obvious.
Things didn't work out so well for Nicola. As the wind in Wellington whistled and raged around us, she told me that she has a rare condition where her body destroys the placenta.
My boy was one of 5, so I had miscarried, was it a year or so before him, and then I had my boy, buried my boy, and then I lost 3 more babies after him. So I lost my last baba in March 2018, and I've stopped now. Making you cry.
Oh my God.
So my last baby, she is buried with my son. So, and with the others, I couldn't bury them; they were too early. But with this last baby, we found out at 11 weeks that she died. I say she's a she, and I had a D&C, so I had her to take home. So It was just a little group of us for this one, and my auntie and my uncle and my dad and my sister and the kids, and we just went home and buried her with my son. So there's 2 of them.
I don't know what to say. I'm really sorry. So you're a mother of 5 babies.
That sounds nice.
Is that how you describe? Is that how you think of yourself?
I think of myself as a mother. I talk about my 5 babies. I guess my boy, of all of them, my boy is most real to me because I held him in my arms. I feel the loss of them all, but my boy, because I held him, feels a little bit different for me. When he was gone, my arms ached. Yeah. But I love them all.
Nicola chooses to celebrate Te Orewa's birthdays.
For me to just say, this is coming up. This is his anniversary day coming up. We're going to have cake. We're going to do these things. And that's how I'm choosing to deal with it. I'm being really proactive for my own sake so that I don't feel hurt by perceptions of people forgetting him, because I'm not going to let them.
So what do you do?
Well, birthdays. The first birthday. Oh God, this is where you gotta laugh, because when he's buried, it gets very hot in January, and so I made him a cake for his first birthday, and we drove up, and by the time we got there, the icing had just puddled all over. It looked terrible. I sat in the car crying over this cake. And then I got a hold of myself. It's a cake. It's a cake. Leave it alone. And then we had a laugh over my cake and had a big cry afterwards, and that was his first birthday. It was stressful on the run up, and then it was very nice to be there and to put his toys on his grave. And yeah, it was hard because it was the first time. It was that marker of the first year. Yeah, the second year was a little bit easier because I made cupcakes this time and they didn't fall apart. And I do his garden. That's part of our ritual. My parenting is to put new flowers in his little garden over him and his sister every time I go up. And I really love doing that. And I come back to work and I show pictures of my son's garden. So I don't have pictures of him growing up, so I show my son's garden to people. Yeah.
So something else grows?
Yeah. And I like yellow flowers for him. I like cheery, pretty flowers. It makes me feel happy to see them and think of him with bright cherry flowers. Yeah. I'm still very much learning to live with whatever my life is going to be. I would say my saving grace, the things that help get me through are my whānau, and especially my iramutu, my nieces and nephews, because they are lovely. And we talk about my boy, and I love that. You know, he's alive amongst these children, and it's beautiful. So I have adults and I have children that I can talk to about my boy. And I can talk to them about my plans for his birthdays and what I'm going to do at Christmas. And they don't think I'm crazy. They just go, okay.
Go back a couple of generations, and every family would have mourned a child who died. The death of a baby would have been commonplace in every street, an everyday occurrence. Once, in sharing the story of Terrell, Debbie Watkin unexpectedly reached back through the generations.
I remember sitting in church with a very elderly woman who looked at me and she said, it's good to see you, but where's your baby? And I just, as I would say, I'm really sorry, my baby's died. And she was quiet and she sort of turned away, and a moment later I remember seeing just tears streaming down her face, and I said, "You're okay?" And she said, My baby died a long, long, long time ago too, and it hurts. And I thought, this is emotion dug deep, and it squeezes out through your eyes in moments of tenderness. And she didn't share much about it, but she just held my hand and knew.
For Kate and Sam, their journey is just beginning.
From a physical standpoint, you got super pregnant super quick, if that makes sense. Like,
it was really interesting because
like your boobs got huge real quick. No, but like physically they did. And like, I remember last time it took a while. And
Can I just say, look at your face.
oh my God.
no, they're gorgeous.
Sam, shut up.
But they got like, within like a couple of
Okay, all right.
It was like, bam, pregnant boobs.
Can I actually? Yeah. And actually, I did look pregnant, but I just like, I think with second pregnancies, they always say you just pop, and I mean, I think from about 4 or 5 months with Ren, people only started noticing then if they didn't know that I was pregnant. But with this one, you could tell that people started noticing. Although having said that, I had a conversation with a woman the other day who is a colleague, and I put my hand on my belly and I was like, she asked me how I was, and I was like, I'm just really tired. And she's like, are you pregnant? And I was like, because I'm huge, and I was like, yes. And then I'm like, did you just, and I have to ask this, did you just think I was fat? So I mean, physically, everything kind of popped a lot quicker.
We'll hear more from Kate and Sam next time on The Unthinkable.
I was really reluctant to tell people I was pregnant, because, I was really scared something would happen again, but also because I didn't want people to think that we had just forgotten our baby.
As they prepare for their second child, Frida.
I just don't even like the idea of going in and sorting a room out again for the second time and not having someone to live in it.
We've watched Frida grow from like a microscopic heartbeat.
The Unthinkable is a podcast series by RNZ. It's available on the RNZ website in the podcasts and series section, and on all the podcasting apps, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify and iHeartRadio. Please subscribe and rate us. The Unthinkable was written and presented by me, Susie Ferguson, and produced by Liz Garton. Our executive producer is Tim Watkin. It was engineered by William Saunders. A special thank you to Kate Gudsell, Sam Arcus, Pania Mitchell, Nicola Bright and Debbie Watkin. Ka kite anō.